2 years ago, her husband vanished without a trace, just hours after saying, "I do." No note, no goodbye. Now, on Christmas Eve, Clara finds a package on her doorstep, with a message only her missing husband could have written. Clara's fingers trembled against the smooth paper of the mysterious gift. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the card again. For Clara, he remembers your star. Only Russell knew. On their third date, under a canopy of impossibly bright stars in Joshua Tree National Park, she'd confessed a secret, whimsical wish to own a first edition of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's The Little Prince, but specifically, the rare 1943 Reinl Hitchcock English edition, with the author's original watercolor illustrations. She'd only ever seen one, under glass, at a museum exhibition years ago. "Why that book?" Russell had asked, his face silvered by starlight. "It's about loneliness and connection," she'd explained, "finding meaning in a vast, empty universe. Plus the illustrations, there's something so pure about them." Russell had squeezed her hand and whispered, "One day, little stargazer, one day." They'd never discussed it again. It had been a moment of vulnerability, sharing a dream so personal and impractical that she'd almost been embarrassed afterward. But Russell hadn't laughed. He'd understood. Now, 2 years after he'd vanished, someone had sent her a package with a message only Russell would know. Clara carefully set the package on her coffee table, staring at it as if it might suddenly animate and speak. She picked up her phone, hesitated, then called Detective Ramos, the lead investigator on Russell's case. "Ramos," he answered, his voice carrying the weighted fatigue of a man who'd seen too much. "Detective, it's Clara Archer." A pause. "Mrs. Archer, it's been a while. I received something today. Something connected to Russell." As she spoke, the initial spark of hope that had flared in her chest began to dim. Described aloud, it sounded thin, circumstantial. "I'll send someone to pick it up," Ramos said. "Don't open it yet." But Clara couldn't wait. Even as she agreed to Ramos's request, her fingers were already working at the wrapping paper. "Of course, I'll wait." She hung up and immediately returned to the package, her heart hammering against her ribs. The paper fell away, revealing a burgundy cloth-covered box. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in cream-colored tissue, was the book. Not just any copy of The Little Prince, the 1943 Reinl Hitchcock edition. Pristine, impossible to find, worth thousands. Clara lifted it carefully, reverently, from its nest. She opened the cover, and a small piece of paper fluttered out. Another note in that same elegant handwriting. "The prince never truly leaves his rose." A cold dread, sharp as an icicle, pierced through her lingering grief. This wasn't a belated romantic gesture from a man who'd had a change of heart. This felt calculated, sinister. The doorbell rang, and Clara jumped, nearly dropping the precious book. It would be the officer Ramos had sent. She returned the book to its box and went to answer the door. Officer Jimenez was young, her uniform crisp, her expression professionally neutral as Clara explained again about the package and its significance. "So this book, it's rare?" Jimenez asked, making notes. "Extremely. Only 525 copies were printed in this first English edition. They sell for upwards of $25,000 when they come up for auction, which is almost never." Jimenez's eyebrows rose slightly. "And you're certain no one else knew about your wish to own this book?" Clara hesitated. "I'm not certain of anything anymore, but I never mentioned it to anyone but Russell. It was a private moment between us." The officer bagged the book, the box, and the wrapping paper. "We'll check for fingerprints and trace evidence. Detective Ramos said he'd follow up with you tomorrow." After Jimenez left, Clara sat alone in her apartment. The immediate, desperate desire that Russell was alive and trying to contact her was quickly choked by a wave of nausea. If he was alive, why this elaborate, cruel silence for 2 years? Clara spent Christmas Day in a fugue state. The book, now in police custody, feeling like a lead weight in her thoughts. The police, when she called again, were sympathetic but stymied. "Mrs. Archer," Ramos said gently over the phone, "we've checked the courier service. The package was paid for in cash, dropped off at a shipping center in Vermont. The security footage shows someone in a hat and coat, face never visible to the cameras." "Vermont?" Clara repeated. "Russell mentioned his family was from New England somewhere. We pursued that angle 2 years ago," Ramos reminded her. "No record of any Archer family matching his description in the Northeast. No property records, no tax records, nothing." Clara closed her eyes, remembering how little she'd actually known about Russell's background. She had never pressed, respecting his apparent desire for distance. "What if he used a different name?" she asked suddenly. "What if Archer wasn't his family's real name?" There was a pause on the line. "That's possible," but without more to go on, Clara made a decision. Thank you for your help, Detective. Please let me know if you find anything on the package. Mrs. Archer, Ramos said, his tone cautious. I understand this has brought everything back to the surface for you, but please don't get your hopes up, and be careful. After hanging up, Clara opened her laptop and searched for private investigators in her area. She was reignited with a terrifying new purpose. If the police couldn't help, she would find someone who could. Her search led her to Marcus Thorne, a grizzled ex-detective known for his tenacity with cold cases. His website was basic but direct. When the trail goes cold, Thorne finds the fire. She called the number and was surprised when Thorne himself answered. Thorne Investigations. Mr. Thorne, my name is Clara Archer. My husband disappeared 2 years ago, and I'd like to hire you to find him. There was a pause. Missing persons isn't usually my specialty, Mrs. Archer. The police have done all they can, Clara finished. But something's happened, something new, and I need someone who can look deeper, someone who won't dismiss me. Another pause. Come by the office tomorrow, 2 o'clock. Bring whatever you have on your husband's disappearance. The next day, Clara sat across from Marcus Thorne in his small, cluttered office. He was older than she'd expected, maybe in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too much of human nature's darker side. She told him everything, their whirlwind romance, his disappearance, and now, the mysterious gift. She handed him a folder containing copies of the police reports, photos of Russell, and printouts of the little personal information she had about him. He was an architectural historian? Thorne asked, scanning the sparse file. Yes, specializing in pre-industrial vernacular structures, old barns, meeting houses, that sort of thing. And you said his family was from New England, but estranged? Clara nodded. That's what he told me. He didn't talk about them much, just said they were old-fashioned and that he'd left that life behind. Thorne made a note. Old-fashioned could mean a lot of things. Religious? Wealthy conservatives? Something else? I don't know, Clara admitted. I never pressed. He seemed pained when the subject came up, so I let it drop. And you were married how long before he disappeared? Less than 24 hours, Clara said, the familiar ache returning. He was gone the next morning. Thorne's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted. That's unusual. Most men who get cold feet do it before the ceremony, not after. He flipped through the photos of Russell, tall, lean, with an academic's thoughtful eyes and a surprising, dimpled smile. Good-looking guy. Charismatic? Very, Clara confirmed. He could make anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room, yet minimal digital footprint, vague background, Thorne mused. Did he have friends? Colleagues? Clara frowned. A few. Most were more acquaintances than close friends. His department chair at the university, a couple of fellow researchers. They all said the same thing. Friendly, but private. No one knew much about his life before he came to California 3 years ago. Thorne sat back in his chair. Mrs. Archer, I'll be straight with you. After 2 years, the chances of finding your husband. I know the statistics, Clara interrupted. I'm not naive. But this book, it's a message. Someone knows where Russell is, or what happened to him. And I need to know, even if the truth is difficult. Thorne studied her for a long moment, then nodded. My rate is $200 a day plus expenses. I'll need a $2,000 retainer to start. Clara didn't hesitate. I'll write you a check right now. 3 weeks passed. January brought rain to Southern California. Clara checked in with Thorne regularly, but progress was slow. Clara tried to focus on her work. She was a curator at a small art museum, but her mind constantly circled back to the book, to the message. He remembers your star. The police had returned the book to her after finding no usable fingerprints or other evidence. It now sat on her shelf, a beautiful enigma that drew her gaze whenever she was home. One evening, as rain pattered against her windows, Clara carefully took the book down and opened it again. She turned the pages slowly, admiring Saint-Exupéry's delicate watercolors, looking for, what? A hidden message? A clue? There was nothing obvious, nothing inserted between the pages. But as she returned to the beginning, something about the end paper caught her eye. Was that a slight discoloration in the corner? She held the book closer to her lamp, examining the cream-colored paper. There, almost invisible unless you were looking for it, a tiny star drawn in what appeared to be very faint pencil. Clara's pulse quickened. She grabbed her phone and took several close-up photos, then called Thorne. I found something, she said when he answered. In the book, a star drawn on the end paper. It's faint, but it's there. Could be nothing, Thorne cautioned. These old books sometimes have marks from previous owners. No, this is deliberate, Clara insisted. It's perfect, symmetrical. And remember the card. He remembers your star. I'm sending you photos. She heard Thorne sigh. All right, send them through. I'll take a look. but don't get your hopes up that this is some kind of treasure map." Clara hung up, frustrated by his caution but understanding it. The next morning, she was surprised when Thorne called her. "I might have something," he said without preamble. "Not from your star, but from another angle. You said Russell specialized in pre-industrial vernacular architecture, right?" "Yes," Clara confirmed. "I found a paper he published 3 years ago, just before he moved to California. It was about barn structures in a specific region of Vermont. Very technical, lots of architectural jargon, but there was a section about a particular style he found noteworthy for its isolation from regional influences. He included photos. And, Clara prompted when Thorne paused, "and I tracked down the area where these barns are located. It's a remote valley in central Vermont, mostly uninhabited except for one large property that takes up most of the valley floor. Heavily wooded, minimal road access." Clara's heart began to race. "Whose property is it?" "That's where it gets interesting. On paper, it belongs to something called the Archer Meroe Collective, through a series of shell corporations and trusts. No individuals named. Very little public information." "Archer," Clara repeated, "like Russell's last name." "Exactly. And here's where it gets weirder. Meroe was an ancient kingdom in what's now Sudan. They were known for their isolation, their ironworking, and their distinctive architecture." Clara's mind was spinning. "So you think this is Russell's family? This collective?" "I think it's worth looking into," Thorne said. "I found an old digitized society paper from the 1950s that mentioned the Archer Meroe Collective acquiring vast, secluded tracts in that area of Vermont. The language was odd. Talked about them seeking sanctuary from the corruption of modern influence." "That sounds like what Russell described," Clara said, excitement building in her voice. "Old-fashioned, isolated. What else do we know about them?" "Not much officially," Thorne admitted, "but I've been making calls to local businesses in the nearest town. Being careful, not raising alarms. There are rumors." "What kind of rumors?" "The locals call them the Kindred. They keep to themselves, but occasionally send members into town for supplies. People describe them as odd but polite. Always pay in cash. Don't engage in small talk. Dress plainly. Some kind of self-sufficient community." Clara's throat felt dry. "A cult? Maybe. Maybe not," Thorne said. "Could just be a private community with their own ways. Some kind of back-to-the-land collective that's been there for generations. But it's the first solid lead we've had." "So what now?" Clara asked. "Now," Thorne said, "I think I need to take a trip to Vermont. See this place for myself. Discreetly." "I'm coming with you," Clara said immediately. "Mrs. Archer, Clara, I don't think that's wise. If this is connected to your husband's disappearance, there could be risk involved." "He's my husband," Clara said firmly. "If there's any chance he's there, or that someone there knows what happened to him, I need to see for myself." There was a long pause. "Let me go first," Thorne finally said. "Scout the situation. If I find anything concrete, then we can discuss you coming out." Clara wanted to argue but knew he was right. Charging in without information could be disastrous. "Fine, but I want daily updates." "Agreed," Thorne said. "I'll fly out tomorrow." After they hung up, Clara returned to the book, staring at the tiny penciled star. The Archer Meroe Collective, the Kindred. These names stirred something cold in Clara's chest. If Russell had been running from this group, if they had somehow found him and taken him back, Clara carefully returned the book to her shelf and went to her laptop. She searched for Archer Meroe Collective and the Kindred Vermont, but found nothing beyond a few vague mentions in historical property records. That night, she dreamed of Russell. They were back in Joshua Tree, under that vast canopy of stars. He was trying to tell her something important, but his voice was fading, growing more distant with each word. She strained to hear him, reaching out, but he receded into darkness, leaving her alone beneath the cold, distant stars. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a name on her lips, Meroe. The next day, Thorne flew to Vermont. True to his word, he called Clara that evening from his motel room in a small town called Sheffield. "The valley is about 20 minutes from here," he told her. "Very isolated. One road in, gated at the entrance to the property. The gate isn't particularly forbidding, simple wooden structure, but there's a sign that says, 'Private property, the Kindred community, no trespassing.'" "Did you see anyone?" Clara asked. "Not at the gate, but I drove through town first, and I did see what I assume were members at the general store. 3 of them, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in simple, dark clothing. Not Amish or anything like that, just plain. No patterns, no logos, nothing flashy." "Did they seem normal?" Clara wasn't sure what she was asking. "Define normal," Thorne said dryly. "They were quiet, kept to themselves. The cashier knew them, called one of the men Mr. Reed. They didn't correct her, but they didn't engage much either." "Reed?" Not Archer, Clara noted. Could be nothing. Could be they use different names in town. I'm going to hang around for a few days, see what else I can learn without raising suspicions. Be careful, Clara said. If they're connected to Russell's disappearance. I'm always careful, Thorne assured her. That's how I've stayed alive in this business for 30 years. Over the next 3 days, Thorne called each evening with updates. He'd learned little more about the Kindred, despite careful inquiries around town. People knew of them, but not about them. I'm going to try a different approach, Thorne told Clara on the 4th evening. There's a ridge overlooking part of their property. With good binoculars, I might be able to observe the compound without trespassing. Isn't that risky? Clara asked. Less risky than trying to go through the gate. I'll be careful. Stay on public land. Keep my distance. The next day passed without word from Thorne. Clara tried calling several times, but each call went straight to voicemail. By evening, she was frantic with worry. She was about to call the local police when her phone finally rang. Thorne, where have you been? I've been worried sick. Sorry, he said, his voice strained. No cell service up on that ridge. I hiked out there at dawn, spent the day observing, only just got back to town. And? Clara prompted. Did you see anything? There was a long pause. I saw buildings, a cluster of them in a clearing. Looks like a small village. Simple structures, but well maintained. Gardens, some livestock, and I saw people moving around. What kind of people? Clara asked, her heart hammering. Another pause. People dressed like those I saw in town. Simple, dark clothing, moving with purpose. They seem organized, disciplined. Not like a hippie commune, more like, I don't know, something else. Did you see Russell? Clara could barely form the question. Clara, Thorne said, his voice suddenly gentle. I need you to prepare yourself. Clara sank onto her couch, knees suddenly weak. Tell me. I can't be 100% certain at that distance, even with good binoculars, but I saw a man who matched Russell's general description. Tall, lean build, similar hair color. Was it him? Clara pressed. Possibly, Thorne said carefully. The man I saw was thinner than in your photos. His posture was different, stiffer, more formal, but the resemblance was strong. Clara closed her eyes, trying to process this information. I need to go there, she said. I need to see for myself. Clara, wait, Thorne cautioned. There's more. The man I saw, he wasn't alone. There was a woman with him, older, maybe in her 50s. She stayed close to him, had her hand on his arm. Not affectionately, more like a guide or a minder. What are you saying? I'm saying that if that was Russell, he didn't look like a man there by choice. His movements were mechanical, his expression vacant. Everyone I observed moved with this strange, synchronized calm, but he especially seemed not fully present. A chill ran through Clara. You think he's being held against his will? I don't know, Thorne admitted. It could be medication, could be some kind of conditioning or programming, could be nothing. Maybe it wasn't even him, but something about that place feels off. Very off. All the more reason for me to come, Clara insisted. I'll fly out tomorrow, Thorne sighed. I figured you'd say that. All right, but we do this carefully. No confrontations. We observe only. And if I say we leave, we leave. Understood? Understood, Clara agreed, already opening her laptop to book a flight. Text me the motel information. I'll be there tomorrow evening. The flight to Vermont was interminable. Clara stared out the window at the clouds below, her mind cycling through scenarios, possibilities, fears. By the time she landed in Burlington and rented a car for the drive to Sheffield, she was exhausted from the emotional cyclone. Thorne was waiting for her in the parking lot of the Sheffield Inn, a small, dated motel that was the town's only accommodation. His weathered face looked even more lined with fatigue. Any changes? Clara asked as soon as she approached him. Nothing significant, Thorne replied. I went back to the observation point this morning. Similar patterns of movement. Couldn't spot the man who resembles Russell today, but visibility wasn't great. Cloudy, some fog in the valley. Clara nodded, scanning the quiet main street of Sheffield. A few locals were visible, going about their evening routines. Did they have any idea what might be happening just a few miles away? I got you a room, Thorne continued, handing her a key. We should talk inside. Best not to draw attention. Once in her small, dated room, floral bedspreads, wood paneling, the lingering smell of old cigarettes despite the no smoking sign, Clara sat on the edge of the bed while Thorne took the room's single chair. Tell me everything, she said. From the beginning, Thorne pulled out a small notebook. The Archer Meroe Collective acquired this land in 1953, according to county records. The purchase was made through a trust, no individual names listed. Over the years, they've added to their holdings. They now own approximately 200 acres, most of it wooded, with a central clearing where the compound is located. "And what exactly is in this compound?" Clara asked. "From what I could observe, about a dozen structures. One larger central building could be a meeting hall or communal dining area. Several smaller buildings that are likely residences. Gardens, a few animal pens, goats, chickens, self-sufficient setup. There's also what appears to be a forge or metalworking shop. Smoke from that area, the sound of hammering." "Metalworking," Clara repeated. "You mentioned Meroe was known for ironworking." "Yes. Could be they're maintaining that tradition. Hard to tell from a distance what they're producing." "And the people? How many?" "I counted approximately 30 individuals during my observations. Various ages, though notably few children. They move about with purpose, tending gardens, caring for animals, working in what might be craft areas. There's a rhythm to it, almost like choreography. Organized, efficient." Clara tried to picture it, this isolated community with their ordered movements and plain clothing. "And you're sure about the man you saw?" Thorne's expression softened slightly. "Clara, I can't be certain, but there was a strong resemblance, and something about the way the older woman stayed with him, guided him. It stood out as different from other interactions I observed." Clara nodded, swallowing against the tightness in her throat. "I need to see for myself." "Tomorrow," Thorne said firmly. "It's too late today, and the hike up to the observation point is treacherous in the dark. We'll go at dawn." Clara wanted to argue but knew he was right. "Fine, dawn. Try to get some sleep," Thorne advised, standing to leave. "And Clara, prepare yourself for any outcome. Even if we do confirm that's Russell, extracting him from that situation, if he's there against his will, won't be simple." After Thorne left, Clara lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep seemed impossible. She was too close now, too filled with questions and hope and dread. She pulled out her phone and looked at her favorite photo of Russell. His face was tilted up toward the night sky, profile illuminated by moonlight, a slight smile playing at his lips. He had looked so free in that moment, so genuinely happy. Had it all been an act? Clara must have eventually drifted off, because she woke with a start to a soft knocking at her door. Disoriented, she checked her phone. 5:30 a.m. Thorne. She opened the door to find him already dressed for hiking, a small backpack over his shoulder. "Ready?" he asked. 20 minutes later, they were driving out of town in Thorne's rental car. The sky was just beginning to lighten, a pale gray blue that promised a clear day. They drove in silence, Clara watching as the town gave way to forests and scattered farms. Thorne eventually turned onto a narrow dirt road, driving about a mile before pulling over near a trailhead. "We hike from here," he said, "about 40 minutes up to a ridge that overlooks the valley. We'll stay on public land, but we'll have a view of much of the compound." The hike was challenging, steep in places, the trail faint and obviously seldom used. Clara was grateful for the hiking boots she'd packed on impulse. As they climbed, her anticipation grew, along with a sense of foreboding. Finally, they crested a rise and Thorne gestured for her to get down. They crawled the last few yards to the edge of the ridge, where a natural formation of rocks provided both a vantage point and cover. Thorne handed Clara his binoculars. "There!" The clearing below. Clara adjusted the focus and gasped softly. Spread out below was exactly what Thorne had described, a small village of simple buildings arranged in a rough circle around a central structure. Even from this distance, she could see people moving about, starting their day. "The larger building in the center," Thorne whispered. "That seems to be where they gather. Yesterday morning they all entered it at the same time. Some kind of meeting or service, I'm guessing." Clara scanned the compound, watching as individuals moved between buildings, tended to gardens, fed animals. If Thorne hadn't pointed out the strangeness of their movements, she might have thought it was simply an industrious farming community. "I don't see him," she said after several minutes of careful observation. "Keep watching," Thorne advised. "Yesterday, the man I spotted didn't emerge until later in the morning." They waited in silence, the sun rising higher, warming the cool morning air. Clara's arms grew tired from holding the binoculars, but she didn't lower them, afraid she might miss something crucial. And then, movement at the door of one of the smaller buildings near the center. A woman emerged, tall, gray-haired, with a straight posture that radiated authority. And behind her, Clara's breath caught. Even at this distance, even with the changes Thorne had described, she would know that silhouette anywhere. Taller than most of the other community members, with that distinctive way of ducking his head slightly when passing through doorways. "Russell," she breathed, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Thorne glanced at her. "You're sure?" "Yes," Clara said, not taking her eyes off the figure. "That's him. That's my husband." Through the binoculars, she studied him hungrily, noting the changes. He was thinner, yes, his posture more rigid than she remembered. His hair was longer, tied back at the nape of his neck, and his face, even from this distance, she could see what Thorne had meant about his expression. It was blank, empty in a way that Russell's animated features had never been. The older woman kept close to his side as they walked toward what appeared to be a garden area. Her hand occasionally touched his elbow, guiding him. Not a romantic gesture, but proprietary, controlling. "Who is she?" Clara whispered. "I don't know," Thorne admitted, "but she seems to have some authority. Others defer to her when she passes." They watched as Russell and the woman reached the garden. Other members were already there, kneeling in the soil, working methodically. Russell joined them, his movements precise but somehow mechanical, like a wind-up toy performing its designated function. What have they done to him? This wasn't the vibrant, intellectually curious man she had married. This was a shell, animated but empty. "It could be drugs," Thorne suggested quietly. "Some kind of sedative or antipsychotic that dulls personality. Or it could be psychological conditioning. Cults often use a combination of sleep deprivation, repetitive tasks, and constant surveillance to break down individuality." "We have to help him," Clara said, lowering the binoculars at last, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "We have to get him out of there." Thorne's expression was grave. "Clara, think about this. We don't know exactly what we're dealing with. How many people are in that compound? What kind of security they might have? Whether Russell would even want to leave." "Look at him," Clara hissed. "Does that look like a man who's there by choice? He's like a zombie. Even if that's true, we can't just walk in there and take him. That would be kidnapping, legally speaking. We need more information, a better plan." Clara raised the binoculars again, finding Russell still kneeling in the garden, his movements robotic as he pulled weeds from between neat rows of plants. The woman stood nearby, watching not just him but the entire group, her posture suggesting vigilance. "What do you suggest then?" Clara asked, not taking her eyes off Russell. "We go back to town, make more inquiries, carefully, try to learn more about the kindred's practices, beliefs, see if there have ever been other members who left, who might talk to us. And in the meantime, Russell stays there. Like that?" The thought was unbearable. "He's been there for 2 years already," Thorne pointed out gently. "A few more days won't make a difference, and rushing in unprepared could make things worse." Clara knew he was right, but every fiber of her being screamed against leaving Russell in that place for even one more minute. "All right," she conceded. "We'll go back, but I want to stay a bit longer. Watch him, please." Thorne nodded. "We can stay another hour. Then we really should go before someone spots us." They continued their observation, Clara drinking in every glimpse of Russell like a woman dying of thirst. He worked steadily in the garden, never looking up, never speaking to the others working alongside him. Occasionally, the gray-haired woman would approach, say something to him that made him nod, and then move on to check on others. "We should go," Thorne said after they'd been watching for nearly an hour. "We've confirmed he's there. Now we need to figure out next steps." Reluctantly, Clara lowered the binoculars and handed them back to Thorne. They retreated carefully from the ridge, making their way back down the trail in silence, each lost in thought. Back in the car, Clara finally spoke. "The book, do you think they sent it?" "The kindred?" Thorne considered this as he navigated the dirt road back toward town. "It seems likely. They would have access to Russell's memories, his knowledge of your conversation about the Little Prince. The question is why." "A test," Clara suggested, "to see if I was still looking for him, if I remembered our connection." "Possibly," Thorne agreed. "Or a warning, a way of letting you know they're aware of you, aware of what matters to you." Clara shuddered. "But why now? After 2 years? That I don't know. Something must have changed. Maybe Russell mentioned you recently, or perhaps they've become aware of some external threat to their isolation." They drove the rest of the way in silence, Clara's mind racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. Seeing Russell in that state, alive but somehow absent, was almost worse than not knowing his fate. "I'll make some inquiries in town. Maybe someone who's had dealings with them beyond the general store." "What should I do?" Clara asked, hating the feeling of helplessness. "Stay here for now. If you're seen asking questions, it might get back to them. Sheffield is a small town. People notice strangers." Thorne returned to the motel late that afternoon, his expression grim. "What did you find out?" Clara asked immediately. He sat heavily in the chair. "Not much, directly. People here are friendly but close-mouthed about the kindred. It's like there's an unspoken agreement not to discuss them beyond superficial observations." "But?" Clara prompted, sensing there was more. "But I did find someone who was willing to talk, off the record. The bartender at the local tavern. His cousin apparently worked as a delivery driver for the hardware store about 15 years ago, made regular deliveries to the kindred's gate. And according to this cousin, there was an incident. He was making a delivery when he saw a young man, maybe 18, 19, running from the compound, being chased by several others. They caught him near the gate, subdued him. Clara's blood ran cold. Subdued how? The cousin wasn't specific. Said the young man was taken back into the compound. He reported it to the local sheriff at the time, but nothing came of it. The sheriff spoke to someone from the kindred who said it was a family matter, a troubled young man who needed care. Without evidence of a crime, the sheriff couldn't do anything. So they've done this before, Clara said quietly. Kept people against their will. It's one account, secondhand, from 15 years ago, Thorne cautioned. But yes, it suggests a pattern of controlling members who try to leave. Clara moved to the window, looking out at the quiet street of Sheffield. Such a normal-looking town. While just miles away, people were essentially imprisoned in a compound cut off from the world. What about Russell? She asked. How do we help him? Thorne sighed. That's where it gets complicated. Legally, we have no standing. Russell is an adult, without evidence that he's being held against his will, evidence that would stand up in court. We can't simply remove him. But we saw him, Clara protested. He's clearly not himself. What we saw was a man who appears subdued, possibly medicated or psychologically conditioned, but proving that to the satisfaction of law enforcement, getting them to take action against a reclusive but otherwise law-abiding community. That's a high bar. Clara turned back to face him. So what, we just leave him there? Accept that he's gone? No, Thorne said firmly. We keep gathering information, build a stronger case, maybe find a way to communicate with Russell directly, assess his mental state. How? Clara demanded. We can't exactly walk up to the gate and ask to speak with him. Before Thorne could respond, Clara's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Mrs. Archer? An unfamiliar female voice. This is Elaine at the Sheffield post office. I have a package here for you. Clara frowned. A package? But how? I just arrived in town yesterday. It was dropped off this morning, the woman explained. Addressed to Clara Archer, care of Sheffield Inn. Since we know everyone's staying at the inn, there's only 3 rooms. I figured I'd call rather than send our delivery person over. Clara's heart raced. Who? Who left the package? One of the kindred, the postmistress said, lowering her voice slightly. The older woman, I think some folks call her Mother Reed. She doesn't come into town often. Mother Reed, the gray-haired woman who had been with Russell that morning. I'll come pick it up, Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her internal panic. Where are you located? After getting directions and hanging up, Clara relayed the conversation to Thorne. They know we're here, she concluded. They must have spotted us on the ridge this morning. Thorne's expression darkened. That's concerning. If they're aware we're watching them, they might move Russell, hide him somewhere else. Or worse, Clara said, voicing the fear that had immediately gripped her. Let's not jump to conclusions, Thorne advised. Let's go get this package, see what it is. It could be a message, some kind of communication. The Sheffield post office was a small brick building on the main street, just a few doors down from the general store. A bell jingled as they entered, and an older woman looked up from behind the counter. Mrs. Archer? She asked, and when Clara nodded, she reached beneath the counter. Here you go. Curious thing, getting a package when you've only just arrived. Clara took the small parcel, about the size of her palm, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. Simple, old-fashioned. Thank you. Did the person who left it say anything? The postmistress frowned slightly. Not really. Just that it was important you receive it. They're not big talkers, the kindred. Clara nodded her thanks and left quickly, Thorne following close behind. They walked in silence back to the inn, both eyeing the package with a mixture of curiosity and dread. Once back in Clara's room, she set the package on the bed, staring at it. Should I open it? She asked. It's addressed to you, Thorne pointed out, and it might contain information we need. Clara took a deep breath and carefully untied the string, then unwrapped the brown paper. Inside was a small velvet box, the kind that might hold jewelry. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside lay Russell's wedding ring, the same one he had left on the nightstand the morning he vanished. Oh my God, Clara whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. But there was something else in the box. A small, folded note. Clara carefully extracted it and opened it. The same elegant, unfamiliar handwriting from the book's card. Some stars are not meant to be shared. He belongs to the constellation. The words sent a chill through Clara's body. It's a threat, she said, handing the note to Thorne. They're telling me to stop looking, that he belongs to them. Thorne read the note, his expression grim. Yes, and they're making sure you know they're aware of you, aware of your connection to Russell. Clara picked up the ring, running her finger over the smooth platinum band. What now? She asked, closing her hand around the ring. feeling its solidity, its reality. Thorne sighed heavily. Now we need to be extremely careful. This confirms several things. They know we're here, they know who you are, and they consider Russell their property. And they know about the stars, about Joshua Tree, Clara added. That was our private moment. The only way they could know is if Russell told them. Or if they extracted that information from him through other means, Thorne said darkly. Clara didn't want to think about what other means might entail. We need to get him out of there. Now before they move him or worse. Clara, we can't just storm the compound, Thorne reminded her. That's not only illegal, it's dangerous. We don't know how many people are in there, whether they're armed, what kind of resistance they might offer. So we just give up? Clara challenged, anger rising to replace her fear. No, Thorne said firmly. We take this evidence to the authorities. Not conclusive proof of wrongdoing, but it might be enough to convince the local sheriff to at least investigate, to check on Russell's welfare. Fine, she agreed reluctantly. But if that doesn't work, one step at a time, Thorne advised. Let's start with the legal approach. The Sheffield Sheriff's Office was a small, tidy building near the town hall. Sheriff David Wilson was a stocky man in his 50s, with a weathered face and cautious eyes. He listened patiently as Clara and Thorne explained the situation, Russell's disappearance 2 years ago, the book's arrival, their discovery of the kindred, and now the ring with its threatening note. I understand your concern, Mrs. Archer, the sheriff said when they finished, but I'm not seeing clear evidence of a crime here. Your husband left your honeymoon suite on his own. There's no indication of force or abduction. And while this community, the kindred, may be unusual in their practices, being reclusive isn't illegal. But we saw him, Clara insisted. He's clearly not himself. He's being controlled, monitored constantly. What you saw, Sheriff Wilson said carefully, was a man participating in gardening activities. That's not evidence of coercion or imprisonment. The note, Clara pressed, pushing the paper across his desk. He belongs to the Constellation. They're claiming ownership of a human being. The sheriff read the note, his expression neutral. Mrs. Archer, I understand this language is disturbing to you, but it's vague, possibly metaphorical. It doesn't constitute a direct threat or confession of illegal activity. Thorne leaned forward. Sheriff, I understand your position, but wouldn't a simple welfare check be appropriate, just to confirm that Mr. Archer is there of his own free will? Sheriff Wilson sighed. The kindred have been in this valley for generations. They keep to themselves, pay their taxes, follow the law as far as anyone knows. I can't just show up at their gate demanding to see one of their members based on a cryptic note and a second-hand account of odd behavior. Then what can you do? Clara asked, frustration mounting. I can make inquiries, the sheriff offered, reach out through official channels, express concern about a missing person possibly being in their community. But without a warrant, I can't enter their property against their wishes, and without evidence of a crime, I can't get a warrant. It was exactly as Thorne had predicted. The legal system had its limits when dealing with isolated, secretive communities. How long will these inquiries take? Clara asked. A few days at least, Sheriff Wilson admitted. I'll need to go through proper channels. Clara stood abruptly. We don't have a few days. They know we're here, watching them. They might move Russell, hide him somewhere else. Mrs. Archer, the sheriff said, his tone firmer now. I strongly advise against any action on your part. Trespassing on private property, attempting to make contact with someone in that community against their leader's wishes. These are actions that could result in your arrest, not theirs. Clara wanted to scream with frustration, but Thorne's hand on her arm steadied her. Thank you for your time, Sheriff, he said diplomatically. We understand the legal constraints. Please do let us know if your inquiries yield any information. Outside the sheriff's office, Clara turned to Thorne. That was useless. It was necessary, Thorne corrected. We need to work within the system first. Exhaust legal options before considering alternatives. Clara caught his meaning. What kind of alternatives? Thorne glanced around, ensuring no one was within earshot. Let's discuss that back at the inn. Once they were safely in Clara's room again, Thorne outlined his thoughts. The sheriff is right about one thing. We can't legally enter the kindred's property without permission, but there might be ways to establish contact with Russell that don't involve trespassing. How? Clara asked. We know members come into town occasionally for supplies. If we could intercept Russell during one of these trips, speak to him directly, assess his mental state. But we have no way of knowing when he might come to town, or if they even allow him to, Clara pointed out. True, Thorne acknowledged, but we could send a message in, something that might reach him, something that might wake him up, remind him of who he was. Clara considered this. The book, The Little Prince. They used it to send a message to me. Maybe we could use something similar, something that would have meaning to Russell. Exactly, Thorne said, nodding. something personal, significant that might break through whatever conditioning they've subjected him to. Clara thought about what might reach Russell, what might penetrate the fog they had enveloped him in. Something from their time together, something that symbolized the connection they had shared. "I have an idea," she said slowly, "but I'll need to get some supplies." The next morning, Clara and Thorne drove to the neighboring town of Lindenville, where there was less chance of their activities being reported back to the kindred. There, Clara purchased art supplies, high-quality paper, watercolors, brushes. Back at the inn, she spread the supplies on the small desk and began to work. Hours passed as she painted, focused intently on creating something that might reach through to Russell, might remind him of who he had been before the kindred reclaimed him. When she finished, she held up the result for Thorne to see, a watercolor painting of the night sky over Joshua Tree, the stars scattered across deep blue like diamonds on velvet. In the foreground, two silhouettes sat close together, gazing upward. "It's beautiful," Thorne said. "But how do we get it to him?" "We take it to the general store," Clara explained. "From what you've learned, the kindred make regular purchases there. We leave it with the shopkeeper. Ask her to pass it along next time any of them come in." "That's actually not a bad plan," Thorne admitted. "Low risk, potential high reward if it reaches him. Though there's no guarantee whoever comes to the store will give it to Russell. It's worth trying," Clara insisted. "It's not illegal, and it's better than doing nothing while the sheriff makes his inquiries." They drove back into Sheffield and parked near the general store. Clara had rolled the painting carefully and placed it in a simple cardboard tube. She'd attached a note that read simply, "For Russell Archer, from Clara." The general store was quiet when they entered, just the proprietor, a friendly-looking woman in her 60s, arranging items on a shelf. "Good morning," she greeted them. "Passing through?" "Actually," Clara said, approaching the counter, "I was hoping you could help me with something." The woman, her name tag read Margaret, tilted her head curiously. "I'll certainly try." Clara placed the tube on the counter. "I need to get this to someone in the kindred community. I was told they shop here regularly." Margaret's expression shifted subtly, a wariness entering her eyes. "They do come in, yes, every week or so for supplies they don't produce themselves. But I don't know if I can." "Please," Clara said, letting her desperation show. "It's important. It's for my husband." Margaret's eyebrows rose. "Your husband is with the kindred?" "Yes," Clara said, deciding that the simple truth was best. "He joined them 2 years ago. I just want him to know I'm thinking of him." It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either, and it seemed to soften Margaret's hesitation. "Well," she said, considering, "I suppose I could give it to whoever comes in next, though I can't promise they'll deliver it. That's all I ask," Clara said gratefully. "Thank you." As they turned to leave, Margaret called after them. "Mrs. Archer," Clara supplied. "Clara Archer." Outside, Thorne gave her an approving nod. "Well handled. Now we wait." "For how long?" "A day or two," Thorne suggested. "See if there's any response. After that, we may need to consider other options." "Like what?" Clara pressed. Thorne sighed. "Like the possibility that Russell may not want, or be able, to leave. Like the possibility that the kindred may take steps to ensure he can't leave." Clara stopped walking. "You mean they might hurt him? Because of the painting?" "I'm saying we need to be prepared for various outcomes," Thorne said carefully. "The kindred have gone to considerable lengths to reclaim Russell, to keep him isolated. They clearly view him as their property. People who think that way can be dangerous when they feel threatened." The thought sent ice through Clara's veins. "What have I done?" she whispered. "You've tried to help someone you love," Thorne said firmly. "There's no shame in that. But now we need to be strategic, careful. We need to consider what happens if Russell can't or won't leave with us, even if we establish contact." Clara nodded, swallowing against the fear rising in her throat. "So we wait." "We wait," Thorne confirmed, "and we prepare for whatever comes next." The rest of the day passed in agonizing slowness. Clara alternated between pacing her motel room and sitting by the window. Thorne checked in periodically, bringing food she barely touched and updates that contained no real news. The sheriff had made his official inquiry to the kindred but had received no response yet. No one from the community had been spotted in town since they'd left the painting at the general store. As evening fell, casting long shadows across the motel parking lot, Clara's phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello?" she answered tentatively. "Mrs. Archer?" A woman's voice, vaguely familiar. "This is Margaret, from the general store." Clara sat up straighter. "Yes? Has someone—" "They came," Margaret cut in, her voice low, urgent. "About an hour ago. A man and that older woman, Mother Reed, some call her. They saw the package. She asked who it was for, and when I told her, Mrs. Archer, she took it. Said she'd make sure it got to the right person, but the way she looked—" "What?" Clara pressed. How did she look? Angry, Margaret said simply. Very angry. And the man with her? Not your husband. Someone else. He looked frightened of her. Mrs. Archer, I don't think your painting is going to reach your husband, and I'm worried that by asking me to deliver it, you might have put yourself in danger. Clara's heart sank. Thank you for telling me, Margaret. Did they say anything else? No, Margaret replied. But they left quickly after that. And Mrs. Archer? They bought rope, a lot of it, and some other things that worried me. What things? Clara asked, her mouth dry. Padlocks, heavy ones, and those zip tie things, the plastic restraints. Clara closed her eyes, trying to push away the images those items conjured. Thank you, Margaret. I appreciate the warning. After hanging up, she immediately called Thorne and relayed the conversation. This is concerning, he said, his voice grave. If they're purchasing restraints, they may be planning to secure Russell more thoroughly, perhaps move him to a more isolated location within the compound. Or worse, Clara said, voicing her deepest fear. Let's not jump to conclusions, Thorne advised, but I think we need to accelerate our timeline. If the sheriff won't act quickly, we may need to take more direct action. What kind of action? I'm thinking we need to get closer to the compound, try to establish visual contact with Russell again, assess the situation. When? Clara asked. Tonight, Thorne said decisively, under cover of darkness. We won't enter the property, but we'll get as close as we legally can. See if there's any unusual activity. It was a risk, but the alternative, waiting while the kindred potentially moved or further restrained Russell, was unacceptable. I'll be ready, Clara said. Night fell over Sheffield, the small town quieting as businesses closed and residents retreated to their homes. In her motel room, Clara dressed in dark clothing as Thorne had instructed, black jeans, a navy sweater, sturdy boots. She pulled her hair back into a tight ponytail and smeared a bit of dark eyeshadow on her cheekbones as improvised camouflage. At 10:30 p.m., Thorne knocked softly on her door. Ready? He asked when she opened the door. Clara nodded, her determination overriding her fear. What's the plan? We drive as close as we can to the trailhead, then hike up, not to the ridge where we were before, but to a different vantage point that should give us a view of the compound from the east side. There's less tree cover there, so we should be able to see any unusual activity, even at night. Will we be able to see Russell? Clara asked. Thorne's expression was grave. That depends on where he is in the compound. If he's in one of the buildings, no. But if there's any activity outside, and given the supplies they purchased today, there might be, we could get lucky. They drove in silence, Thorne taking a different route than before, approaching the area from another direction. We walk from here, he said quietly. Stay close, follow my lead, and step where I step. We need to move silently. The hike was more challenging in darkness, even with the small red-filtered flashlight Thorne occasionally used to check their path. The terrain was steep, rocky in places, with tangled underbrush that caught at their clothing. Clara's heart pounded, not just from exertion but from anticipation and fear. After about 40 minutes of difficult hiking, Thorne held up a hand, signaling her to stop. They had reached a small clearing near the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley from a different angle than their previous observation point. From here, we should be able to see the eastern side of the compound, Thorne whispered, pulling binoculars from his backpack, including what looks like a storage building or workshop area. Clara crouched beside him, peering down into the valley. The compound was visible as a collection of dark shapes against the slightly lighter ground, with a few windows emitting a soft, yellow glow. It was late, nearly midnight, but apparently, some members of the kindred were still active. Thorne handed her the binoculars, and she adjusted them, focusing on the lighted windows. Most seemed to be in the central building, where several figures moved back and forth, their silhouettes occasionally visible through curtains. There, Thorne whispered, pointing to a smaller structure set slightly apart from the others. That building wasn't lit up when we observed earlier. Looks like some kind of activity there now. Clara shifted her view to the indicated building. It was indeed illuminated now, with what appeared to be lantern light rather than electric lighting. The door opened, and several figures emerged. 4 people, moving purposefully. She caught her breath as one of them came into clearer view. Even in the dim light, even at this distance, she recognized Russell's tall form. But something was wrong. He was being led, or rather half-carried, by 2 other men, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Something's happening, she whispered urgently to Thorne. Russell, he looks drugged or something. They're taking him somewhere. Thorne took the binoculars, focusing intently. You're right. He appears sedated or restrained in some way. They're moving him to that larger building near the center. Mother Reed is with them. Clara felt panic rising in her chest. We have to do something. They're going to hurt him, or move him somewhere we can't find him. Clara, wait, Thorne cautioned, grabbing her arm as she instinctively started to rise. We can't just charge in there. There are at least 30 people in that compound, and we have no idea if they're armed or how they might react to intruders. He pulled a small camera from his backpack, not a phone, but a digital camera with a powerful zoom lens. This can capture images in low light. We'll get proof of what's happening. They watched in tense silence as Russell was half dragged, half carried into the central building. Thorne took photos continuously, the camera making soft clicking sounds in the quiet night. What do you think they're doing? Clara whispered. I don't know, Thorne admitted. But given what they purchased today, restraints, padlocks, they may be securing him more thoroughly, perhaps in response to our presence in town, to the painting you tried to send in. They continued their observation for nearly an hour, but there was no further activity visible from their vantage point. All the figures had disappeared into the central building, and though lights remained on, no silhouettes could be seen through the curtained windows. We should go, Thorne finally said. We have some evidence now, and staying longer increases our risk of being discovered. They made their way back down the trail in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. By the time they reached the car, it was past 1 a.m., and Clara's muscles ached from tension as much as exertion. Now we take these photos to the sheriff, he said. Show him that Russell appears to be in distress, possibly being moved or restrained against his will. It might be enough to convince him to take immediate action. Back at the motel, they reviewed the photos Thorne had taken. Despite the darkness and distance, several clearly showed Russell being supported, or restrained, by two other men. His posture slumped, his movements unnatural. Mother Reed was visible in some, directing the activity with authoritative gestures. These are good, Clara said, hope flickering in her chest. The sheriff has to see that something's wrong, that Russell isn't there voluntarily. Let's hope so, Thorne agreed. Get some rest. We'll go to his office first thing in the morning. But rest proved elusive for Clara. She lay on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the ceiling. What were they doing to him now? While she lay here, safe but helpless, she must have eventually drifted into a fitful sleep, because she woke with a start to knocking at her door. It was Thorne, already dressed and looking grim. We need to go. Now. What's happened? Clara asked, instantly alert. I just got a call from a contact in town. There was activity at the Kindred compound early this morning. Several vehicles left, heading north. Clara's blood ran cold. Russell? I don't know, Thorne admitted, but it's concerning. We need to get to the sheriff immediately. Clara dressed quickly, and they drove straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilson was just arriving himself, unlocking the front door when they pulled up. Sheriff, Thorne called, approaching rapidly. We need to speak with you, urgently. Wilson looked surprised but nodded. What's this about? Has there been a development? Several, Thorne said, placing his camera on the sheriff's desk and quickly explaining what they had observed the night before. He pulled up the photos, showing them to Wilson in sequence. And this morning, Thorne continued, multiple vehicles left the compound, heading north. We're concerned they may be moving Russell to another location, possibly to prevent any contact or investigation. The sheriff studied the photos with a frown. I see a man being assisted by others. That's not necessarily evidence of wrongdoing. He could be ill, injured. Sheriff, Clara cut in, frustration mounting. That's my husband. He vanished 2 years ago, on our honeymoon. Now we find him in this isolated compound, clearly not himself, possibly drugged, being moved in the middle of the night after they purchased restraints and padlocks. How much more evidence do you need that something is very wrong here? Wilson sighed, rubbing his chin. Mrs. Archer, I understand your concern, but the Kindred have been here for generations without causing trouble. Clear evidence of a crime. This is the evidence, Clara exclaimed, pointing at the photos. And if you don't act quickly, they'll move him somewhere else, somewhere we can't find him. The sheriff was silent for a moment, considering. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll go out there this morning. Conduct a welfare check. Asked to speak with Mr. Archer directly. It wasn't everything Clara had hoped for, but it was a start. Thank you, Sheriff. When will you go? Within the hour, Wilson promised. But I need to do this officially, alone. I can't have you two interfering. We understand, Thorne said before Clara could protest. We'll wait to hear from you. Outside the sheriff's office, Clara turned to Thorne. He's going to be too late. If those vehicles were moving Russell, we don't know that for certain. They could have been doing something else entirely. We can't take that chance, Clara insisted. We need to get back to the compound, see if Russell is still there. Thorne hesitated, then nodded. They drove back toward the area of the compound but parked well before the access road. This time, they made for a different vantage point, closer to the gate, where they might be able to see if the sheriff was admitted when he arrived. The compound looked quieter than it had the day before. "Something's different," Clara whispered. "It's like the energy has changed." Thorne nodded grimly. "I count maybe 10 people visible. Yesterday there were 3 times that many. I think some of them did leave this morning." "Russell?" Clara asked, her voice catching. "No way to tell from here," Thorne admitted. "We'd need to get closer, see inside the buildings." They waited in tense silence, watching the compound. After about 40 minutes, the sheriff's patrol car appeared on the access road, approaching the wooden gate that marked the entrance to the Kindred's property. The car stopped, and Sheriff Wilson emerged, adjusting his hat before walking to the gate. He pressed what appeared to be an intercom button and waited. After a long moment, a figure emerged from one of the buildings, the tall, gray-haired woman they recognized as Mother Reed. She approached the gate with unhurried steps, her posture straight, emanating authority even from a distance. Clara and Thorne were too far away to hear the conversation, but they could see the body language, Wilson speaking, gesturing occasionally. Mother Reed mostly still, occasionally shaking her head. The exchange lasted perhaps 5 minutes before Mother Reed turned and walked back toward the central building. "Is she getting Russell?" Clara whispered hopefully. "Maybe," Thorne said. "Or maybe she's just continuing the conversation inside, away from prying eyes." They watched as Mother Reed disappeared into the building. Sheriff Wilson remained at the gate, occasionally checking his watch. 10 minutes passed. 15. Finally, Mother Reed emerged again, accompanied by a man, but not Russell. This was an older man with a full beard, dressed in the same simple, dark clothing all the Kindred seemed to favor. Again, Clara and Thorne could not hear the exchange, but they could see the sheriff becoming more animated, gesturing more emphatically. The bearded man remained calm, occasionally nodding or shaking his head. At one point he handed something to Wilson, papers of some kind. "What's happening?" Clara murmured. "I'm not sure," Thorne replied, "but it doesn't look like they're going to let the sheriff in or produce Russell." After another few minutes of conversation, Wilson returned to his patrol car, the papers in hand. He sat there for a moment, appearing to read them, then started the engine and drove away. "He's leaving?" Clara hissed, incredulous. "Without seeing Russell? Without even entering the compound? They must have given him some kind of documentation," Thorne theorized. "Something that satisfied his immediate concerns, or at least gave him pause. We need to know what those papers were," Clara said, "and we need to know if Russell is still in there." They retreated from their observation point and made their way back to where they had parked the car. "Let's go straight to the sheriff's office," she suggested. "Find out what happened, what those papers were." Thorne nodded in agreement, and they drove directly to the small brick building in the center of Sheffield. Sheriff Wilson was at his desk, studying the documents they had seen him receive at the compound. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "I figured you two would be back soon." "What happened?" Clara demanded. "Why didn't you insist on seeing Russell?" Wilson sighed, gesturing to the chairs across from his desk. "You might want to sit down for this." Clara remained standing. "Just tell me, is Russell still there?" "What did they say?" The sheriff picked up one of the documents. "According to the Kindred, specifically Elder Thomas Reed, Russell Archer returned to their community voluntarily 2 years ago, after what they describe as a brief period of exploration in the outside world." "That's a lie," Clara exclaimed. "He disappeared from our honeymoon suite without a word. If he was leaving voluntarily, why not leave a note? Why abandon his wedding ring?" "They have an explanation for that too," Wilson continued. "They claim that Russell, or Elias, as they call him, was struggling with his decision, felt guilty about hurting you, and couldn't face a direct goodbye." "Elias," Clara repeated, the unfamiliar name feeling wrong on her tongue. "Apparently that's his birth name within the community," Wilson explained. "Russell was a name he adopted during they called it his wandering time." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "This is absurd. None of this explains why he appears drugged, why he was being physically moved by others last night, why they purchased restraints and padlocks." "I asked about that," Wilson said. "They claim Elias has been ill, suffering from seizures. The men you saw were helping him to the community's healing center. The restraints were for their greenhouse project, securing vines and young trees." "And you believe them?" Clara asked incredulously. "I have no evidence to contradict them," Wilson replied. "And they provided this." He handed over another document, a letter, handwritten on simple paper. Clara took it with trembling hands and read, "To whom it may concern, I, Elias Reed, known outside the community as Russell Archer, confirm that I have returned to the Kindred of my own free will. My time in the outside world, including my relationship with Clara, was a period of confusion for which I am now receiving healing and guidance. I ask that my privacy and my choice be respected. Elias Reed." At the bottom was a signature. It resembled Russell's handwriting, but something about it felt wrong to Clara. Too stiff, too formal, lacking the fluid ease of his usual script. "This isn't real," she said, her voice shaking. "This isn't Russell's choice. They're forcing him, controlling him somehow." "Mrs. Archer," the sheriff said gently, "without evidence of coercion, there's not much more I can do. They've offered to have Elias Russell call you directly in a few days, once he's stabilized from his recent illness." "A few days?" Clara repeated. "By then they could have moved him anywhere. Sheriff, please, you have to go back. Insist on seeing him in person, talking to him alone." Wilson spread his hands helplessly. "Without more to go on, I can't force the issue. They have rights too. Privacy, religious freedom, property rights. The court set a high bar for interfering with isolated religious communities." "So that's it?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "We just give up? Accept their version of events?" "I didn't say that," Wilson replied. "I'll continue making inquiries. I've put in a call to the state police, asked them to check on those vehicles that left the compound this morning, and I've requested Russell's original missing person file from California to compare this signature with known samples of his handwriting." "Thank you for trying, Sheriff," Thorne said when Clara remained silent, struggling with her emotions. "Please let us know if you learn anything new." Outside, Clara finally broke down, tears streaming down her face. "They have him, Thorne. They have him, and they're going to keep him, and there's nothing we can do about it." Thorne guided her to a nearby bench, away from curious onlookers. "Clara, listen to me. This isn't over. We have more information now than we did before. We know Russell is, or at least was, in that compound. We know there's a connection between him and this elder Thomas Reed, possibly a family relationship. But they won't let us see him," Clara said, wiping at her tears. "They're just going to keep him isolated. Keep him. Whatever they've done to him. That empty shell we saw." Thorne was silent for a moment, considering. "We wait for the call." "What call?" "The one the sheriff mentioned. If they even allow the call," Clara pointed out, "and if they do, it will be monitored, controlled. He won't be able to speak freely." "Perhaps," Thorne agreed, "but there might be clues in what he says, how he says it, and it buys us time to explore other avenues." "What other avenues?" Clara asked desperately. "There might be people who have left the Kindred," Thorne suggested. "Former members who could provide insight, testimony about their practices. If we could find someone like that." "All right," Clara agreed, wiping away the last of her tears. "We'll wait for the call. And in the meantime, we'll look for former members, anyone who might have information about what goes on in that compound." Thorne nodded encouragingly. "That's the spirit. This isn't over, Clara. Not by a long shot." 3 days passed with agonizing slowness. Clara and Thorne remained in Sheffield, making discreet inquiries about the Kindred, searching for anyone who might have left the community or had insider knowledge of their practices. Their efforts yielded little. Sheriff Wilson provided updates on his inquiries, but they too were minimal. The state police had located 2 vehicles that had left the compound that morning, but they contained only supplies and a few Kindred members on what appeared to be a routine trip to a larger town for materials not available in Sheffield. There was no sign of Russell among them. The handwriting comparison was inconclusive, but as Clara had noted, there were subtle differences that could be attributed to stress, illness, or coercion. And still, no call came from Russell. On the morning of the 4th day, Clara sat in her motel room, staring at her silent phone. "They're not going to call," she told Thorne when he checked in. "They've bought themselves time, that's all." "Let's give it one more day," Thorne suggested. "And in the meantime, I have a new lead to follow." Clara looked up, hope flickering. "What lead?" "The bartender at the local tavern mentioned someone, an older man who lives outside town, a bit of a hermit. Rumor has it he left the Kindred decades ago. Though no one knows the full story, he might be willing to talk to us, give us insight into their practices." "Where is he?" Clara asked, already reaching for her jacket. "About 20 miles from here, in a cabin near Willoughby Lake." The bartender drew me a map. They drove through the Vermont countryside, small farms nestled in valleys, the occasional glimpse of a lake gleaming in the distance. The cabin was remote, accessible only by a narrow dirt track that tested even Thorne's SUV. It was small, weathered but well-maintained, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. A garden, now mostly harvested for the season, stretched behind it. "Let me do the talking at first," Thorne suggested as they approached. "If he really did leave the Kindred, he might be wary of strangers." Clara nodded, hanging back slightly as Thorne knocked on the rough wooden door. After a long moment, it opened to reveal an elderly man with a lined face and sharp blue eyes. His white hair and beard were neatly trimmed, and he wore simple clothes that reminded Clara of the Kindred's plain attire, though less severe. "Yes?" he asked, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "Mr. Abram Reed?" Thorne inquired. The old man's eyes narrowed. "Haven't used that name in a long time. Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Thorne. This is Clara Archer. We're trying to learn about the Kindred community, and we heard you might have some insights." Abram studied them both, his gaze lingering on Clara. "Archer, you said? Any relation to the Archers of the Kindred?" "My husband," Clara said, stepping forward. "His name is Russell Archer, though I've recently learned he was born Elias Reed. He disappeared 2 years ago and has apparently returned to the Kindred. We're trying to understand what happened to him." Something flickered in the old man's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or sympathy. "You'd better come in," he said after a moment's consideration. "This isn't a conversation for doorways." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable. A stone fireplace with a crackling fire, handcrafted wooden furniture, shelves lined with books. It reminded Clara, with a pang, of the aesthetic Russell had favored in their brief time together. "Sit," Abram offered, gesturing to chairs near the fire. "I'll make tea." While he busied himself in the small kitchen area, Clara examined the bookshelves. Many were works on architecture, history, philosophy, subjects that would have interested Russell. She wondered if this was coincidence or if these interests were common among the kindred. When Abram returned with a tray of tea, she asked him directly, "Are you related to Russell, to Elias?" The old man set down the tray and took a seat across from them. "I was," he said simply. "Elias would be my great-nephew, if family ties still counted after leaving. His grandfather was my brother." Clara's heart raced. Finally, someone with direct knowledge of Russell's background, his family. "Why did you leave?" she asked. Abram's weathered face grew somber. "I left because I could no longer abide by the covenant. The rules, the isolation, the methods." "What methods?" Thorne prompted when Abram fell silent. The old man sighed deeply. "The kindred began with noble intentions. My great-grandfather founded the community in the 1880s as a place of refuge, a return to simpler values, self-sufficiency, craftsmanship. The name Archer was chosen to represent aim, purpose, direction. Meroe was added later, inspired by the ancient kingdom's mastery of ironworking, which we also practiced." He poured tea into 3 cups, the familiar ritual seeming to help him gather his thoughts. "But over generations, isolation breeds its own pathologies. What starts as a desire for simplicity becomes rigidity. What begins as devotion becomes control. By my father's time, the kindred had developed strict hierarchies, elaborate rules about who could speak when, who could leave the compound, who could marry whom." "And that's why you left?" Clara asked. Abram nodded. "Partly. I was young, curious about the outside world. I'd found books, smuggled them in, read about places and ideas beyond our valley. The elders, including my father, decided I needed correction." "What kind of correction?" Thorne asked, his voice careful. "First, isolation. Then, when that didn't sufficiently dampen my curiosity, herbs. Preparations that dulled the mind, made one compliant, docile." Clara felt a chill, like what we saw happening to Russell. "Likely similar," Abram agreed. "The recipes are passed down, modified over time. Some are simple sedatives, valerian, skullcap. Others are more potent combinations, designed to create specific states of consciousness, suggestibility, dependency." "How did you escape?" Clara asked. A ghost of a smile crossed Abram's face. "I pretended compliance, acted as though the treatments had worked, gained back their trust, bit by bit. And then one night, I simply walked away. It was 1968. I was 23 years old. "And they didn't come after you?" Thorne asked, surprised. "Oh, they tried," Abram said. "For months, I'd spot them in towns where I was working, asking questions. But I kept moving, changed my name, eventually settled here, far enough away to be safe, but close enough to keep an eye on them, to help others who might leave." "Have there been others?" Clara asked eagerly. "Other people who left the kindred?" Abram's expression darkened. "A few, not many, and fewer still who left successfully. The kindred have evolved since my time. Their methods of control have become more sophisticated, and they're particularly determined to keep those born into the community from leaving." "Like Russell," Clara murmured. "Yes," Abram confirmed. "Those born into the kindred are considered sacred vessels, carriers of the pure bloodline. When one leaves, as Elias did, it's seen as a grave transgression, a wound in the community's body that must be healed. By bringing them back," Thorne concluded. "By any means necessary," Abram corrected grimly. "In the old days, that might have meant simply sending people to find them, to persuade them to return. Now, I've heard stories, abductions, drugs, Extended purification rituals that amount to brainwashing. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. That's what's happened to Russell, isn't it? They've brainwashed him. Abram regarded her with compassion. Based on what you've described, yes, it's likely he's undergone reintegration. Can it be reversed? Clara asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since she first saw Russell in that compound. Abram was silent for a long moment, considering. It depends, he finally said, on how long he's been subjected to the treatments, on his own inner resistance, on whether there's still a core of his original self preserved somewhere inside. Some who leave the kindred never fully recover. Others, with time and support, find their way back to themselves. So there's hope, Clara said, clinging to this slender thread. There's always hope, Abram agreed. But there's also reality. The kindred will not easily surrender one of their own, especially not someone like Elias, who is likely considered a Reed by birth, part of the leading family. That woman, Clara remembered. Mother Reed. She seemed to be in charge of Russell, always with him. Abram nodded. That would be Margaret Reed, I imagine. My brother's daughter. Elias's aunt, or great-aunt perhaps. She would have been a child when I left, but even then, she showed signs of being a true believer, devoted to the community's strictest interpretations. And Thomas Reed? Clara asked, remembering the name from the sheriff's report. The elder who spoke with Sheriff Wilson. If he's still alive, that would be my brother. Abram said, something like grief flickering across his features. He would be very old now, in his 90s at least. The man we saw with Mother Reed at the gate was indeed elderly, Thorne confirmed. White beard, stooped but still commanding. Abram closed his eyes briefly. Thomas, still controlling the community after all these years. If he's Russell's grandfather, might he be sympathetic? Clara asked hopefully. Might he understand that Russell had found happiness outside? With me? Unlikely, Abram said bluntly. To Thomas, the outside world has always been a source of corruption, a threat to the purity of the kindred. If anything, he would see Elias's marriage to you as proof of that corruption, a bond that needed to be broken for Elias's salvation. Clara felt as though she'd been physically struck. So the book, the ring, those weren't from Russell directly. They were messages from the kindred. The book? Abram asked, curious. Clara explained about the rare edition of The Little Prince, the star drawn on the end paper, the note that had accompanied it. Abram listened intently, his expression growing more troubled. Yes, that fits their methods. Using intimate knowledge extracted from Elias to create a message that would resonate with you personally. He remembers your star, not I remember, but he, speaking of Elias in the third person, as if he were separate from his actions, his memories. And the second message, Clara continued. Some stars are not meant to be shared. He belongs to the constellation. That was with Russell's wedding ring. A warning, Abram said grimly. A clear statement of their claim on him. The constellation is the kindred, the community as a whole, bound together in a fixed pattern, unchanging. But why? Clara asked, anguish in her voice. Why send these things to me at all? Why not simply keep Russell hidden? Let me believe he had left me, vanished. Abram considered this. There could be several reasons. Perhaps Elias continued to speak of you, to remember your connection even through their treatments. Perhaps they wanted to test whether you were still looking for him, whether you posed a threat to their control. Or perhaps it was simply cruelty, a demonstration of their power. We have him. We know what matters to him, and by extension, to you. Clara shuddered, remembering the cold dread she had felt upon receiving the book. There must be something, Clara insisted, desperation in her voice. There is one possibility, Abram said slowly. A final option, though it may not be what you want to hear. Tell me, Clara demanded. Whatever it is, I need to know. Contact, Abram said simply. Direct, personal contact with Elias. If there's any part of him that still remembers his life as Russell, that still carries his love for you, seeing you in person might reach him in a way that messages or intermediaries cannot. But they won't let me near him, Clara pointed out. They've made that clear with their warnings, with their refusal to let even the sheriff see him. Not openly, no, Abram agreed. But the kindred do send members to the outside world for necessary supplies, materials they can't produce themselves. If you could engineer an accidental meeting, somewhere away from the compound, hope flared in Clara's chest. Like in town, if we knew when Russell might be sent to the general store or somewhere else in Sheffield, it's possible, Abram said, though they're likely to keep Elias closely monitored, especially now that they know you're looking for him. They might not send him out at all, at least not until they believe you've given up and left the area. So we make them think we've left, Thorne suggested. Check out of the inn, make a show of driving away, but double back discreetly. It could work, Abram acknowledged, but you'd need patience, and eyes in town, someone who could alert you if Elias is seen. They spent the next hour discussing logistics, how to make it appear they had left town, where they might stay that wouldn't attract attention, how to arrange for Margaret to contact them if Russell was spotted in Sheffield. As they prepared to leave, Abram took Clara's hand in his weathered one. "I must warn you," he said gently. "Even if you succeed in making contact with Elias, he may not be the man you remember. The Kindred's methods are thorough. Their goal is to erase the individual's sense of self outside the community, to replace it with absolute devotion to the collective." "I understand," Clara said, though the thought pierced her heart. "But I have to try. I have to see him, speak to him directly. I need to know if there's anything left of the Russell I loved." Abram nodded. "I respect your determination, and I wish you success." He turned to a bookshelf and removed a small volume bound in faded leather. "Take this. It's a journal I kept during my early years after leaving the Kindred. It details some of their practices, their language, their methods of control. It might help you understand what Elias has experienced, how to potentially reach him." Clara accepted the journal gratefully. "Thank you for everything." As they drove back toward Sheffield, Clara clutched the small book in her hands, feeling as though she'd been given a map to a territory both foreign and intimately connected to Russell. The next day, they put their plan into motion. Clara checked out of the Sheffield Inn, making sure to mention within earshot of the clerk that she was heading back to California, since there's nothing more to be done here. Thorne similarly made a show of packing his car and driving out of town. But instead of leaving Vermont, they reconvened at a small cabin Thorne had rented under a false name, 20 miles away near a popular fishing lake. Far enough to be off the Kindred's radar, close enough to return to Sheffield quickly if needed. Clara contacted Margaret at the general store, explaining their plan and asking her to call if she saw Russell in town. Margaret agreed, her voice lowered even over the phone, clearly nervous but willing to help. And so began a period of waiting unlike anything Clara had experienced before. Days stretched into a week, then two. She read Abram's journal cover to cover, then again, absorbing the detailed descriptions of the Kindred's practices. The journal painted a disturbing picture of a community that had evolved from a simple back-to-the-land collective into something far more controlling, more sinister in its manipulation of members. Hierarchies that placed the Reed family, the descendants of the founders, at the top, with absolute authority over other members. Most disturbing were Abram's descriptions of what happened to those who tried to leave, or who were brought back after leaving. The person who emerges from reintegration, Abram had written, bears only a physical resemblance to the one who entered it. Their memories remain, but divorced from emotion, from connection, like books on a shelf that belong to someone else. Clara wept when she read those words, imagining Russell, vibrant, curious, loving Russell, reduced to an empty vessel, his memories of their love together, rendered hollow, meaningless. But she refused to give up hope. Abram had also written of resilience, of the human spirit's capacity to preserve some essential core of self even through the most systematic attempts at erasure. Clara clung to this possibility, that somewhere within the shell she had observed moving mechanically through the Kindred's compound, some spark of Russell remained, and that if she could reach him, speak to him directly, that spark might flare, however briefly, into recognition. 18 days after they had supposedly left Sheffield, Margaret called. "He's here," she said without preamble. "Your husband, with two others, Mother Reed and a younger man. They're at the hardware store now, but they usually come to the general store after, for foodstuffs they don't grow themselves." Clara's heart raced. "I'm on my way. 20 minutes. Stall them if you can." She and Thorne had prepared for this moment, had a vehicle ready, had rehearsed the fastest route back to Sheffield. Even so, the drive seemed interminable, each minute stretching as Clara imagined Russell, Elias, finishing his business and returning to the compound before she could reach him. They parked a block away from the general store, and Clara quickly checked her appearance in the visor mirror. She had deliberately dressed simply today, in muted colors not unlike those favored by the Kindred, her hair pulled back in a plain style. Nothing that would immediately mark her as an outsider, as a threat. "Remember," Thorne cautioned as they prepared to separate, "the goal is a brief, direct interaction. Don't try to convince him to leave. Don't make accusations against the Kindred. Just try to connect, to see if there's recognition." Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. This might be her only chance to reach Russell, to see if anything of the man she loved remained beneath the vacant exterior she had glimpsed at the compound. Thorne headed toward the hardware store to monitor the situation from a distance, while Clara made her way to the general store. Through the window, she could see Margaret behind the counter, alone in the shop. No sign yet of Russell or his companions. The bell jingled as Clara entered, and Margaret looked up, relief washing over her face. "They're still at the hardware store," she whispered as Clara approached the counter. "Thank you," Clara said fervently. For everything. I'll try to engage Mother Reed, Margaret offered. Ask her about their apple harvest or something. Might give you a moment with your husband. Clara positioned herself near a display of local honey, pretending to examine the jars while keeping a clear view of the door. Her heart hammered so loudly she was sure it must be audible in the quiet store. 5 minutes passed. 10. Had they changed their routine? Gone back to the compound without stopping here? And then the bell jingled. Mother Reed entered first, her tall figure commanding attention even in the simple setting of the country store. Behind her came a younger man, perhaps in his 30s, with the same deliberate movements Clara had observed in all the kindred, and then Russell. Even prepared, even having seen him through binoculars at the compound, the shock of his appearance hit Clara anew. He was thinner, yes, his face more angular than she remembered, but it was his eyes that broke her heart, flat, empty, without the spark of curiosity and warmth that had defined him. He moved with the same mechanical precision she had observed before, following Mother Reed like a shadow, his gaze rarely lifting from the floor. Margaret, true to her word, immediately engaged Mother Reed in conversation. Mrs. Reed, just the person I wanted to see. I was wondering about your apple harvest this year. We have a few local varieties I thought might interest you. As the older woman was drawn into conversation, Clara moved carefully, positioning herself near where Russell stood, slightly apart from the others, his posture rigid, awaiting direction. Her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest, Clara stepped directly into his line of sight. Russell, she said softly, just his name, nothing more. His eyes lifted, met hers, and for a moment, a fraction of a second, there was nothing, no recognition, no change in his vacant expression. And then something flickered, a tiny shift, a momentary focus. It's me, Clara, she continued, keeping her voice low, steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. From Joshua Tree, the stars, remember? His brow furrowed slightly, the first genuine expression she had seen on his face. His lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound emerged. I received the book, Clara pressed, sensing she had only moments before Mother Reed noticed their interaction. The Little Prince. And your ring. I've been looking for you, Russell, for 2 years. He began, his voice rusty, as if seldom used. I am not. Russell is not my name. The words were flat, recited, but there was something in his eyes now. Confusion, perhaps, or the barest hint of struggle. Your name is whatever you choose it to be, Clara said gently. But you chose Russell once. You chose me. We were happy, under the stars. Remember? For a heartbeat, something profound shifted in his expression. Clara, he whispered, just her name. But in that one word was confirmation that something of Russell remained, buried beneath layers of conditioning but not entirely erased. And then Mother Reed was there, inserting herself between them with remarkable speed for a woman of her age. Elias, she said sharply, we are finished here. Her hand closed around Russell's arm in that familiar proprietary gesture, and instantly, the moment of connection was severed. His expression smoothed back into vacancy, his posture stiffening once more. Elias needs his medication, Mother Reed said to no one in particular, but her cold gaze was fixed on Clara. We must return. She steered Russell toward the door, the younger man falling in behind them protectively. But as they reached the threshold, Russell turned his head, just slightly, and his eyes met Clara's one last time. In that brief glance was something Clara would replay in her mind for hours, days afterward. Not a plea for help, not a declaration of love, but a flicker of awareness of the man he had been. A momentary connection across the gulf that separated them. And then they were gone, the bell jingling as the door closed behind them. Clara stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Margaret approached cautiously, concern etched on her features. Are you all right, dear? He recognized me, Clara whispered. Just for a moment, but he did. He said my name. Thorne entered the store a few minutes later, having observed the encounter from outside. They're heading back to the compound, he reported. Moving quickly, Mother Reed looked agitated. Clara nodded, still processing what had just happened. I reached him, Thorne. Just for a moment, but I reached him. There's still something of Russell in there, beneath whatever they've done to him. What now? Margaret asked, glancing nervously toward the door as if expecting the kindred to return. Clara took a deep breath, steadying herself. Now we have a decision to make. Back at the cabin, Clara and Thorne discussed their options in light of this new information. He recognized you, Thorne acknowledged. That's significant. It suggests their conditioning isn't absolute, that there's potential for him to remember more, perhaps even to resist their control. But he's still there, still in their control. One moment of recognition doesn't change that. That night, alone in her room at the cabin, Clara read Abram's journal again. focusing now on his descriptions of his own recovery after leaving the Kindred. Even decades later, he wrote of occasionally experiencing echoes of his conditioning, when he would find himself falling into patterns established during his years there. And Abram had left voluntarily, had been preparing mentally for his escape for months. Russell's situation was far more complex, taken back against his will, subjected to intensive reintegration, possibly heavily medicated. His journey back to himself, if it was even possible, would be longer, harder. Clara thought about what she had seen in his eyes today, that brief flicker of recognition, that moment of connection. It had been real, undeniable. Could she build on that moment? Create more opportunities for connection, for recognition? Perhaps, but at what cost to him? If these brief awakenings were followed by harsher corrections from the Kindred, was she helping him or causing him more suffering? And what of her own life? The idea of relocating to Vermont, of structuring her entire existence around the slim hope of occasionally reaching Russell, of perhaps someday helping him find his way back to himself. It was a massive sacrifice, with no guarantee of success. Yet the alternative, returning to California, accepting that Russell was lost to her, seemed impossible to bear. How could she resume her life, knowing he was alive but imprisoned in both body and mind, knowing that a part of him, however small, still recognized her? Clara slept fitfully, her dreams haunted by images of Russell's eyes. In the morning, she made her decision. "I'm going back to California," she told Thorne over breakfast, "at least for now." He looked surprised. "You're giving up?" "No," Clara said firmly. "I'm being strategic. The Kindred know I'm here now. Russell will be under even stricter control. Trying to establish contact again immediately would be futile, possibly harmful to him." Thorne nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "So you return to California. Make it appear you've accepted the situation, given up, and then?" "And then I plan," Clara said, "carefully, thoroughly. Maybe connect with experts on cult deprogramming. Learn everything I can about their methods and potential countermethods. I put my affairs in order, prepare for a possible long-term relocation, and when enough time has passed that the Kindred might have lowered their guard somewhat." Thorne considered this, then nodded approval. "It's wise. Difficult, but wise. And in the meantime, I can maintain some surveillance of the Kindred, keep track of any significant changes." "You'd do that?" Clara asked, touched by his continued commitment. "I would," Thorne confirmed. "This case, it's not just a job anymore. I want to see it through, to help if I can." They spent the day making arrangements. Clara would fly back to California the following morning. Thorne would remain in Vermont for another week, establishing discrete observation protocols before also returning to his home base, where he would coordinate long-term monitoring of the Kindred. They agreed to check in regularly, to share any new information or insights, to refine their strategy over time. It wasn't the immediate resolution Clara's heart craved, but it was a path forward, a way to maintain hope while acknowledging reality. The night before her departure, Clara stood outside the cabin, gazing up at the stars. They weren't as brilliant as they had been in Joshua Tree, where she and Russell had shared their dreams, but they were beautiful nonetheless, constant in their distant glow. She thought of the message that had accompanied the Little Prince book. At the time, it had seemed sinister, a violation of a private moment. Now, she wondered if it contained a kernel of truth, if somewhere in Russell's conditioned mind, the memory of their night under the stars remained, a small flame that couldn't be entirely extinguished. "I'll find a way back to you," she whispered to the night sky. "However long it takes, I promise."